explosion of cardinals and the College of Cardinals and the Pope being the temporal head and not just the spirit. We think that's just the biggest made-up joke in the universe.
Most of you are already familiar with the controversy that tore the Eastern Orthodox Church away from the Catholic Church, the bold declaration that the Holy Spirit proceeds both from the Father and the Son. To that, the Orthodox Church pushed back hard, insisting that the Holy Spirit proceeds only from the Father alone and nothing else. And this debate has been raging for more than 1,000 years. In this video, we are going to settle once and for all which side has the stronger case. First, I want you to hear straight from an Orthodox priest exactly how they see this controversy, and then we will confront head-on why the Catholic Church stood its ground and did what it did. Let's listen.
The very egregious change to the Nicene Creed. In the 6th century, the bishops in Spain began to contemplate making an addition to the creed. They were fighting Arian heretics who denied the divinity of Christ, and they added one Latin word to the third paragraph called the Filioque. It means and the Son. And they made an affirmation that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. Churches never believed that. The Church didn't say that in the creed. And after we articulated the creed, the council following Nicaea in 381 said that the creed cannot be changed, not even in a syllable. Filioque, it's 4 syllables. The Pope smashed the Spanish bishops and said, you can't do that. Again, around the time of Charlemagne, this is about 800, the bishops at that time in that area tried to put the Filioque into the creed. The Pope once again smashed them, and not only did he forbid it, but he had the original creed in its original Greek and the original Latin translation carved and affixed to the doors of St. Peter's. I went to St. Peter's looking for it. It's still there. It's not on the doors, but if you go into St. Peter's, into the narthex, and you look to the south, it's still there on the wall without the Filioque. In 1009, under pressure, the Pope consented to put it into the creed. When that happened, the Patriarch of Constantinople ceased commemorating the Pope. He considered that to be a major violation of the faith and its church unity. In the doctrine of the Holy Trinity, to understand what the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit have in common, and to understand what they have in uniqueness of their person, the way theologically that's been done by the Fathers is that which belongs to the divinity, that which belongs to the divine nature, is shared in common by the Father, by the Son, and by the Holy Spirit. This would be, of course, their being self-existent, right? They have the power of being, the ability to create, being all-knowing, being all-powerful. These are aspects of the divine nature that the Father, His Son, and the Holy Spirit share in common because they're one God. What's unique about the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, what belongs not to their feces, not to their nature, but to their person, to their hypostasis is the Greek word, is that the Father is the Father. He's the origin of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. The Son is the only begotten of the Father, and the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father. That which they do not share in common, they share uniquely, meaning that only the Father is the Father, only the Son is the Son, and only the Holy Spirit is the Holy Spirit. As soon as you make an affirmation that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, you destroy this fundamental theological conviction that what is ever not shared in common by the nature is uniquely a property of the unique person. Because now, the Father remains the origin, but he shares with the Son something that the Holy Spirit does not share, which is that they're commonly the source of the Holy Spirit, but it doesn't belong to the nature. It's not as though that being the source of the Holy Spirit is a part of being deity. If it was, then the Holy Spirit wouldn't be deity. So it violated, it made the Father and the Son special in relationship to the Holy Spirit. And we think that the consequence of that has been a demotion of the Holy Spirit and His inspired authority in the Church.
Now, as the Orthodox priest just explained, the Catholic Church's decision to add to the Nicene Creed the statement that the Holy Spirit proceeds both from the Father and the Son was a direct response to one of the most dangerous heresies ever to threaten Christianity, Arianism, which was watering down the full divinity of Jesus Christ by treating Him as something less than truly God. So in order to shut the door on that heresy once and for all, the Church declared clearly and without ambiguity that the Holy Spirit proceeds both from the Father and the Son. But here is where the problem comes in, because the Council of Ephesus had already stated that nothing, absolutely nothing, should ever be added or taken away from the creed, which is precisely why the Eastern Orthodox Church takes such strong issue with the Filioque. It was not introduced through an ecumenical council representing the whole church, but was indeed inserted through a unilateral act of Western authority, and the Eastern Christians felt that the Pope had overstepped his boundaries, both procedurally and theologically, a tension that ultimately became one of the central driving force behind the Great Schism. And this is not just an Orthodox complaint, because even some Catholic theologians have had the honesty to admit that the way the Filioque was added was not canonical, even while they continue to stand behind the theology itself. But now that we have addressed the procedural problem with the Filioque, the bigger and more important question remains, is it actually theologically correct? That is exactly what Scott Hahn tackles in our next clip. Let's listen.
That's right. I mean, in the 7th century and beyond, you have a semi-Arian heresy spreading in the West, mostly in Spain, that the church in the West has to respond to. And so the Bishop of Rome does by inserting the Filioque so that the full divinity of the Holy Spirit is affirmed more explicitly. But there's also more to it than that, because there was already tension between East and West, and so the East didn't accept that decision and began to controvert it over the course of the next few centuries until finally in 1054 they have the mutual excommunications. And so more calmly and dispassionately, I went and looked at the Filioque, kind of wanting to find that the Orthodox were right. But, by common consent, the only way we know the so-called eternal processions of the Son from the Father and the Holy Spirit from the Father and through the Son, or from the Father and the Son, the only way we know the eternal processions are through the temporal missions. And nobody disputes that in the temporal missions, the Father sends the Son to become man. And according to the farewell discourse in John 15 and 16, the Father and the Son send the Holy Spirit. And so if the missions reveal these eternal processions, and there's no way to know the processions apart from the missions, then, if everybody is affirming that the Father and the Son send the Holy Spirit, then how can the Holy Spirit proceed from the Father and not from the Son? And,
Now, as Scott Hahn explains, one of the strongest biblical arguments for the Filioque comes from what theologians call the temporal missions of Trinity, and the principle is straightforward. The way the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit reveal themselves and act in human history is not random or accidental, but a direct window into who they eternally are. Because what God does in time reflects what God does in eternity. So apply that principle to the Holy Spirit, and the Catholic position becomes very hard to dismiss, because when you look at what actually happens in the New Testament, the pattern is unmistakable. In John chapter 20, verses 22, Jesus himself breathes on his disciples and say, receive the Holy Spirit. And then at Pentecost, in Acts chapter 2, Peter stands up and declares to the crowd, Jesus, exalted to the right hand of the Father, has poured out the Spirit that you now see and hear with your own eyes. So which means the Spirit is not sent by Father alone. He's sent by the Father and the Son together. And if what happens in history reveals what is eternally true within the Trinity, then the conclusion is almost unavoidable. The Holy Spirit proceeds eternally from both the Father and the Son. Now, this is further explained by a priest from an Eastern Catholic Church who makes a fascinating observation that even though the Nicene Creed, as they've received it, contains the Filioque, they do not recite it during church services because they are more aligned with the Orthodox understanding of it, which tells you just how deep and complex the conversation really is. Let's listen.
Do you deny that it's true that the Holy Spirit proceeds from both, in the way Augustine was trying to explain it?
I do. I don't want to be heretical here, of course. I am Catholic, but I believe there's a way of the subtleties within that debate, and this is where the semantics comes in. Yeah. We have to say, if you're going to put, for instance, if you go to Greece and you go to a Roman Catholic church in Greece and hear the Roman Catholic Mass in Greek, the Filioque is not in the creed.
Why was that?
Because it's Greek. It's the original creed. The original creed.
So as they were developing, was the same Mass as was being celebrated in the West, even though they grew independently?
No, there was different ones, but the creed was always used ever since Nicaea.
Okay.
So the creed became part of the
So that never
Eucharistic
changed,
celebration.
whereas universally in the Western Church, that Filioque clause bit was added, but not
Correct.
Not in Greece.
And I honestly don't know, because obviously Greece, even in Greece, if they were celebrating Roman Mass, they would have used Latin up until Vatican II. So I'm guessing the Filioque was, correct me if I'm wrong, listeners, but I'm guessing that the Filioque was in the Latin creed when the Catholics in Greece celebrated. But now at the Novus Ordo, they went back to the original Greek creed, so they do not have the Filioque in the creed.
Now, when I go to the Byzantine Church, that is omitted from the creed.
Yeah.
When was permission given to the Eastern churches to not include that bit?
So Vatican II very explicitly asked us to return to our traditions. There was, because of especially Soviet communism, there was an insecurity that came and a fighting with the Orthodox, because of course in the beginning of the Soviet movement in the USSR, the government, the atheistic government, wanted to control the church because they saw how pervasive the church was. So in the beginning they said, the Orthodoxy is the national church, because they thought they could control it. So then you had these Byzantine Catholics that were the first ones persecuted because their head was in Rome, and so they started doing this persecution. So at first, only the Byzantine Catholics were persecuted, and then later on, they realized the Orthodox, we can't control them. So then they started persecuting the Orthodox as well. So you certainly have this attempt, but because of that, the Catholics and the Orthodox started butting heads.
Yeah.
And so the Byzantine Catholics, feeling insecure about this, started looking and more Western. They started adapting Western traditions to distinguish themselves from the Orthodox, exactly. So Vatican II later said, you Byzantines have become too Latinized. You've been doing things that are too Latin. You need to go back to your original traditions. And unfortunately, it took the Western Council telling us this to get us to do that. So we started looking more and more Eastern when that happened. And so that was when some bishops started putting the "and the Son" in parentheses. Yeah. Like, in other words, this is not original to us. But it wasn't until 2007, when we retranslated our Ruthenian Byzantine Catholic books, that it was just completely left out, which was John Paul's encouragement, Pope John Paul.
Okay, so you're of the same mind as the Orthodox, who say that this addition is not just sort of superfluous, but actually incorrect. So, and yet you think the two can be reconciled in a way that Orthodox don't. So how does that happen?
So I think that all apostolic churches, Catholic and Orthodox, in order to promote and to establish union, need to have the same creed. And why not just go with the original? We understand the history that the Romans put it in there for a very specific reason, and even a good reason, to fight that heresy. We understand Augustine's point of view about the Holy Spirit coming from being the love between the Father and the Son, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing. But I believe that there are subtleties within the language with Augustine. I do believe that Augustine, it does, in a sense, depersonalize the Holy Spirit, calling him
the love between,
I do believe that there's issues there within, as the Orthodox would say, so like using the Orthodox mindset, it seems to them that you have a hierarchy within the Trinity. You have the Father first, He generates the Son, and then the Holy Spirit comes from the Father and the Son. So it seems to be almost like a ranking. Father, then Son, then Holy Spirit, which is, of course, heresy. The Catholic Church would never say that's the case. But within the Orthodox mindset, because of that, then you can have, well, if that's the case, then couldn't you have the Holy Spirit then generate...
Now, what is truly fascinating is that most Catholic and Orthodox theologians today have come to recognize that the disagreement over the Filioque is not as wide or as deep as it might first appear. And in fact, many scholars on both sides have concluded that the controversy has always been as much about language as it has been about genuine doctrinal contradiction, because the Greek theological tradition and the Latin theological tradition developed different vocabularies and different ways of expressing the same Trinitarian realities. And when you carefully examine what each side is actually trying to say about the Holy Spirit, you begin to realize that they are often pointing toward the same truth through different conceptual lenses rather than defending two different fundamentally opposed positions. This is precisely why the Catholic Church holds the Eastern Orthodox in such extraordinary high regard, recognizing them as a church that preserves valid sacraments, valid apostolic succession, and a profound and ancient theological tradition, even though full communion with the See of Peter has not yet been restored. And yet for me personally, as a Catholic, this is where I must be honest about where I stand. The Catholic Church is the church that Jesus Christ himself established when he said to Peter that upon this rock I will build my church and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And that promise carries with it the seal of divine protection and infallibility that no other institution on earth can claim. It is precisely because of that seal, that unbroken promise of Christ himself, that I submit to the authority of the Catholic Church on this and every other question of faith, not blindly or without thought, but with the full conviction that where Peter is, there is the church, and where the church is, there is Christ. And it is with that same conviction and that same love for our Orthodox brothers and sisters that I pray and believe that the day will come when the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church will once again be in full and visible communion, united around the See of Peter as they were in the first millennium of Christianity. That reunion, I believe, would be one of the greatest gifts the Holy Spirit could give to the world. I hope this video is helpful. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. God bless you.